Welcome to the Mediate Your Life podcast. I'm your host, John Kenyon. In this fascinating and heartwarming episode of the Mediate Your Life podcast, I'm joined by Sarah Peyton, a well-known expert in trauma healing, relational neuroscience, interpersonal neurobiology, and nonviolent communication. Sarah's work bridges the worlds of science, empathy, and healing, helping us understand how conflict, both internal and external, can be transformed into connection and growth. We explore the deep connections between trauma, conflict, and healing, weaving together neuroscience, empathy, and the transformative power of resonance. This is part one of a rich, thought-provoking, informative, and deeply moving series of conversations that I trust you will find as valuable and enjoyable as I did. I am here with Sarah Peyton. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on to my Mediate Your Life podcast.
Oh, what a pleasure to be here, John.
Well, it feels like a big honor. You are very, very well known in the nonviolent communication world, kind of a celebrity at this point, and you're known outside of it too for your work with trauma, healing trauma, neurobiology, interpersonal neurobiology, and you've studied with some big name people in the field. And you and I know each other, through nonviolent communication, that we're both trainers of that work. But and we have this intention to talk about our overlap with trauma and conflict and NVC and all these rich territories we can cover together. But you've written books and you do all kinds of trainings, and I think you're sought after to give talks on these topics and you have a podcast yourself. You and Roxy Manning have a podcast you do a yearly conference online related to your work with trauma and the Resonant Self, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about. And would you like to tell people a little bit about your story, your journey of getting to where we are now, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's such a delight to be here with you, and it's fun that we finally turned on the recording because when we were talking, we keep going into things that sounded really juicy, and then we would stop because we were not recording. So I'm very glad that the recording is turned on and we get to explore things in detail. I started out going into nonviolent communication because I was reading Marshall's book about peace. I can't even remember the name of it now, but I had it memorized basically. And it was about social justice. And I was like, this is really cool stuff. This kind of external conflict mediation is really of interest to me. And so I actually had never gone to any kind of workshop in my life. And I signed up for Marshall. He was going to be doing a 3-day, and it was just 5 hours. It was a 5-hour drive for me. And I drove and I left my family and went to this conference. I got there and he was word for word reciting what I already had memorized because I'd been listening to the CD set over and over again. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be sitting here listening to stuff I already know by heart. Mm. And so a woman stood up and she said, I'd like to do an empathy circle. And I was like, I'll do anything that I don't know by heart already. So I went to the empathy circle and nobody wanted empathy. And she said, I don't know what empathy was. And she said, anybody who's got an issue that you can't resolve, you can bring it here. And I was like, okay, well, I can't hug my adopted son. Nothing had ever changed for me inside my brain. My brain was a trauma brain. My mom had dissociative identity disorder when I was growing up. And and the inside of my brain was a really difficult and scary place because I was so mean to myself. I mean, you read psychology books then, and they were all like, whatever happened to you in the first 3 years of your life is just set in stone. You're just stuck with the brain that you have from childhood. And I was like, well, I am totally out of luck. So I sat there in this empathy circle and people were making feelings and needs guesses for me. And I had this incredible experience of having an actual flashback of being 3 years old and reaching out to hug my mother and having her recoil from me. And once I, was like with that, then I thought, oh, well, no wonder I can't hug my adopted son. And I went home and hugged him and I was like, okay, that was cool. And now all of a sudden I've shifted to, the external conflict to like, what can NVC do for internal conflict? So I was going to workshops and people were saying, I was like, I want to work on internal conflict. And they were like, you can't. You can't do that here. It's much more complicated. I don't support that. You have to choose an external contract. This is folks teaching NVC in the community. I was like, dang. Then I found John Kenyon and I got to it was before the days of online. We were on the telephone. I did 3 years, I think, of conflict mediation study. I was lying on my couch with my telephone pressed to my ear and it was marvelous. It was just really deep, life-changing, sweet, beautiful work. And it could happen on the phone. I remained really interested in internal conflict. I studied with Susan Skye and continued to pursue like relational neuroscience. Why does NVC change us? What the heck is it doing in there with our neurons? And this became my obsession, and that's the books and my continuing interest and passion.
Yeah. Yeah. I really just get your passion for it. And you have the concept of the resonant self. Yes. Which I think is pretty similar to in the work I do, the third side, the third chair, I would call it sometimes, that being the mediator of not only other people's conflicts and trying to help them, but also ourselves as that internal mediation and mediating between ourselves and others, but that resonant relational self. And maybe talk a little bit from your work. What is that?
Yeah. So in nonviolent communication, we start to learn about making guesses of feelings and needs for people when they are experiencing confusing and difficult and conflicted situations. And as that happens, as we make feelings and needs guesses for people, the place where the energy is bubbling in the brain, which is the amygdala, starts to shift and it starts to move out to the right temporal lobe with needs guesses and calms the amygdala with feelings guesses. And the hippocampus begins to be able to do its job, which is to contextualize what's going on and make sense of it. Oh, this person is not actually wanting to harm me. They actually are trying their very best to figure out something that works for both of us. I can see that now, these kinds of things that happen as people begin to relax. When I was first studying, very rarely talked about emotional affect. There was an emphasis on the ability to name feelings and name needs, but there wasn't really an emphasis on, like, let your voice actually reflect what you're understanding. Let your voice say, instead of, are you angry because you need some friendship and connection? Let your voice say, are you angry? Do you love friendship and connection? Which actually, Susan Skye actually works with a lot and works with a lot in terms of needs energies and the way that needs energies, as we deepen into our NVC practice, begin to come alive in the voice and in the body. And I was like, okay, here we are. What humans really need is they need to have a sense that they are actually being understood by another human. And if somebody says, are you angry because you have a need for friendship and connection? It's a cognitive understanding. And if somebody says, are you angry? Do you love friendship? Do you love connection? All of a sudden, we're in another playing field in a way that takes us into this idea that actually comes from Daniel Siegel. I'm sure you're familiar with him, who says the thing that calms humans more than anything else is resonance. And I was like, okay, what happens if we're getting our internal voice in these internal conflicts to come alive with advocacy and passion and presence and emotional investment? what happens then?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I started to work on this concept of the resonant self.
At first, when you were talking, I had this association to that coaching idea of matching, kind of matching people's energy or intensity. I mean, it seems like that's part of it, like, but allowing that emotionality into our empathic connection with people, not just the cognitive naming of words, but also really kind of filling our body language with that emotion, right? But I think also as I have learned more and more about your work and other people in the trauma space, it's and you use this term a lot, like warmth, like a warm
Mm,
accompaniment, and I've
mm.
become to see how important that is, and I bring it in more and more intentionally into my work, but I've really been inspired by what you have done there. That warmth in the voice and the face and the how we can learn to not only give it to others, but we can give that warmth, that loving, it's basically that loving voice, right? That loving tone. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. Oh, what yumminess. There's a kind of a circuit, a system of circulation of thoughts and energy that moves between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala on the right hand side of the brain. The resonant witness is both the capacity to decode others and ourselves in terms of an understanding of relationality and emotional experience, because it is a circuit that connects to the amygdala where warmth is located, where love happens. Then we get this beautiful combination of warmth and precision. Precision offered by nonviolent communication specificity, and warmth offered by allowing there to be a right hemisphere circuit of affection that's beginning to run, that is a recreation of the best of secure attachment when children are small and in relationship with their parents. If we don't have engagement um, and warmth and a sense of really being with, then we're actually in a different hemisphere. We're in the left hemisphere. We're in the instrumental brain. It's not a part of the brain that changes in response to trauma. So without another body going, yes, I get this, we lose like orders of magnitude of power in healing possibility and in growing the new neural connections in the right hemisphere that are what every human needs in order to be able to be with life as it is. Life is effing hard.
Mm-hmm.
How do we be with it as it is? We need these robust, strong, passionate connections in our own brains with ourselves and others in order to have the very best fruits of our NVC
Yeah.
practice.
Well, you're referencing the right hemisphere, the relational hemisphere. And at some point, I want to get updated on the latest of neuroscience that, as you understand it, in terms of right and left hemisphere, and but relational and instrumental. And I think there's more and more understanding of how the brain works in more nuanced, complicated, not just simple ways. But before there, I heard you, yeah, just talking about that relationship with the amygdala and the precision of language that NVC can offer, plus in combination with this warm, loving kind of voice quality that we can that's related to secure attachment.
Yes, yes. And we need to keep in mind consent, because if people have been manipulated by warmth, then they need us to back off on the warmth in order to feel like they're safe.
That's so obvious when you say it, but I realize that isn't something I consciously keep in my mind. That of course, right? That even not just because some people sometimes associate NVC with being manipulative, right? Using empathy or focusing on feelings and needs in order to get people to do things, right? But I had never really actually had what you just said was like a light bulb of, oh, people could even experience warmth as manipulation. So in terms of how the brain works and the question that, yeah, you brought forward at the beginning, like this inquiry you've been on for a long time of how does empathy and this language of our feelings and our needs and other things, how does that really allow us to heal our brains, heal from traumas, heal from wounding? And yeah, so I want to circle back a little bit to the resonant self witness, which I think of as the capacity to be the mediator of our life, of our experience, internal and external. And in the internal family systems work, it's called the self, that is brings this healing to the parts. So it's in different bodies of work. There's different names for it. Yeah, right. And I too am just fascinated by how do we create connection when there's conflict, and in a way we're talking about just a form of conflict, and where there's violence maybe that has led to trauma of different sorts. But I'm fascinated by what is that resonant self-witness in terms of awareness. So I've done a lot of like fascination with mindfulness and consciousness. And could you speak anything about that you like, that realm of how mindfulness and just our ability to be conscious and aware, how you think of that, how that relates to what we're talking about?
Well, mindfulness is a fascinating area of research, and depending on the type of mindfulness practice that we do, the brain changes how it's working in response to how it's being used. There's been some beautiful research done on monks who've meditated for over 50,000 hours, where it shows them that like your average person walking around has a lot of stuff happening in the right hemisphere. And with the kind of meditation that these monks did for their 50,000 hours, which I think was Tibetan, their activity was in the left prefrontal cortex. What happens with activity in the left prefrontal cortex is a honed capacity for attention, like almost a superhuman capacity to direct attention and to stay focused. So I thought, I wonder what's happening with the right hemisphere. What's happening with that right hemisphere? Does the form of meditation that these monks do, does it resolve trauma? Does it change trauma? Does it make trauma immaterial? And my sense is that to some extent, some of the practices of Tibetan Buddhism resolve trauma, but there's this enormous sort of movement that does transcend trauma to some extent, having that amount of focused attention, bringing the energy of the brain to the left hemisphere for pinpoint, attention. It allows, a monk at any moment to shift their attention there and to stay out of the right hemisphere. Now, the fellow who brought Eastern meditation to the United States, whose name you would know.
Jack Orfield. Yeah.
There we go. He talked about how, his meditation, what he was taught, he ended up being fabulous. He was a fabulous meditator on the cushion. He got off the cushion and with his family, and it fell apart. He had to be on the cushion for the meditation to be effective. And so whatever it was that he was practicing did not also resolve trauma. It allowed a certain patterning of, to step forward. But then when we're in the weeds of relational connection, which takes us directly into the unprocessed trauma of the right hemisphere, all of a sudden we're losing our temper, we're slamming the door, we're slamming down the phone, all kinds of stuff that we do when we step into that deep place of trauma. And that's what's so interesting about conflict. You say what you will about conflict, it's alive, which means it's changeable, which means that brains are actually in a fluid state. Mm-hmm. When people are feeling
activated into conflict, yeah?
Yeah, when people are activated into conflict, they're actually in a state where their brains can be changed.
Yeah.
By the
response.
mediation practices. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is lovely to know. You walk into the world in a different way. When people are upset, you're less likely to run screaming and more likely to step in and wonder about what's happening for them.
Yeah, that's what you're just saying now is something that's deepened in me a lot recently, of just I guess it's been there all along in a way, but it's felt so much more clear that that conflict triggers often the traumas that we carry, that there's this enormous opportunity to heal if we have the tools. And I think of the tools as skills, but also a structure that holds us and process kind of steps to follow. If we have all that, we really can heal so much of what comes up when we're in conflict with others or conflict with ourselves. Actually, but I want to circle back to what you said, make sure I got it in terms of the meditation. And you said the prefrontal cortex, and maybe the left part of the prefrontal cortex, and how that relates to attention and the
And
ability,
executive function and optimism.
executive function and optimism. And then you talked about trauma being stored unconsciously in the right hemisphere of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So and the ability, I think you were saying that if you practice, well, there are a lot of different kinds of meditation, but the ability to focus attention, and if you've really practiced that deeply,
50,000 hours.
50,000 hours, are you saying, like, your understanding of that is that meditation can help you not get caught in something you haven't talked about, but is the default mode network, which I know you do talk a lot about, right? That kind of
Yeah.
automatic voices in us that go,
Mm.
right? But that ability to keep coming back to conscious attention, conscious presence, that can sort of bypass whatever maybe negativity that's stored. And so anyways, is that what you're saying? That even though the focus is on the left hemisphere, it maintains our kind of equilibrium because we
I
have
think
a
so. I
conscious
think
attention.
there's a huge, but also Tibetan Buddhism has some really cool trauma resolution practices, I think, as well, that are a part of their 50,000 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. All that gets covered in 50,000 hours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the default mode network is such an interesting thing to begin to talk about, because what happens with the default mode network is, for folks who aren't so familiar with it, it's the automatic voice of the brain. So when you wake up in the morning and before you get out of bed, your brain's ping-ponging around. That's the default mode network. You're washing dishes, your brain starts to ping-pong around. That's the default mode network. You're driving a long distance, you run out of radio stations, your CD player's broken or whatever. Your brain starts ping-ponging around. That's the default mode network. It's what do we default to when we're not focusing externally. So part of what happens then with that hyper capacity of the left hemisphere to bring focus is people aren't riding around in their default mode network at all, or if they are at all, they can immediately pop out of it. But what trauma processing does, what the work of Susan Sky, and then which I have continued to develop with the latest neuroscience, shows us is that when we do time travel to the frozen memory, to the intrusive memory, to whatever memory snags us, or to the felt sense of childhood or felt sense of of difficult relationships. When we time travel to those places and bring nonviolent communication, empathy, bring resonant language, bring warmth and protection and advocacy, and I am with you, then the default mode network itself changes. This was shown by Ruth Lanius's case studies with a different modality, that instead of using resonating witness or John Kenyon internal conflict mediation, instead they time traveled with huge power animals. So an enormous mama grizzly bear would go back through time to take care of the situation. A huge black panther would travel with the person and protect them into the memory to protect the child. or the young part of the self. And so when she tracked this before and after, what she saw was that the default mode network changed in response to having the time travel. Because in that experience of being held with affection and warmth and protection and advocacy and understanding, the amygdala calms and the hippocampus can begin to contextualize. Oh, this was just an event that happened. Oh, he was just a traumatized little kid. Yeah, context comes. So the default, she saw it on the fMRI, the way the track of the default mode network stopped going through the amygdala and started traveling in a different path, the path of the untraumatized brain. Trauma impacts our brains, scars our brains. Each different kind of trauma hurts our brains differently. But what really happens with people who've lived through trauma and are not living in states of PTSD, or people who have healed their PTSD, is this different default mode network that doesn't have to keep recirculating into the intrusive memory.
Into that.
Yeah. So we're changing the very structure of the brain's use of itself with the work that you and I do and that all of our listeners do.
Yeah, that's so hopeful and powerful. Just the way you're talking about how much we can heal, just like we can heal a cut on our skin or something, right? We can same power of healing internally. Yeah.
Well, we aren't healing those injuries that our brain has from the trauma, but we're changing the way the brain works.
Like the pathways, we're creating new pathways through the brain.
We're creating, that don't have to rely on the scarred areas.
So yeah, that sounds important from your understanding. It's not so much about, like, it's almost like a scar that doesn't fully heal, but is there something about the healing of it itself, but that it's always going to be somewhat of scar, but then there's these different pathways that can get created. Is it?
Yeah, the most profound impact of on people who've lived through childhood trauma or early trauma is on their stress system. And the most profound healing that we do is with the stress system. We're decreasing the stress radically. So we still have to deal with, like, sometimes if you've received verbal abuse, for example, you'll have auditory processing disorder. And you still have to deal with the auditory processing disorder, but because the stress is so much lower, you can find your workarounds and your memory aids and your speech support, and figure out what ways are most effective for you to express yourself and to decode difficult information. You're making decisions based on a realistic sense of your brain, instead of having to cycle off into and manage a stress response as well.
Like we're able to respond and function from a place where our brain is more relaxed, our nervous system is relaxed. We're using our kind of whole system, and not just the parts. It's the stress response, the fight or flight that shuts us down. Yeah.
Another thing that does this is that changes the brain's response to stress are the Robert Gonzalez type needs meditations, where people spend long periods just dwelling into needs energies. This was shown by Herbert Benson's work at Harvard to create an epigenetic change in the hypothalamus, which changes the way the brain responds to stress at the epigenetic level. So we have we're just touching beauty when we touch nonviolent communication and let it come alive. Yeah.
In NVC, we can focus on certain things we're observing out in the world and how that's meeting our needs or not, and our feelings are giving us feedback about that. Right? But then there's a way to focus on needs that it goes more just deeply into the internal experience, right, of those qualities, and how those qualities can bring us into all these positive emotions, right, that flood our nervous system with positivity and that warmth and right. And so that Robert and others, Susan and others, and yourself, that really pioneered that way of working with almost like the internal experience of the pure energies of feelings and needs, right? And yeah.
Yeah.
And how healing, you're talking about how healing, that's
Mm-hmm.
actual research connected to what that does to us in that healing way. Yeah, I think related to that in terms of what creates that, how do we do this, right? And people listening will be like, "Wow, yeah, how do I do this?" And I will highly recommend folks to go read both of your books that are
Oh, thank
amazing,
you.
and your work to take do work training with you. But in your training and your books and all, something I have learned so much from, that's these different ways of, and you referenced some of them just a moment ago, of like there's just feelings and needs guesses, but that's just one of, I think there's 9 or so ways of using language, and not like using poetry or using metaphor. Um, and can you, yeah, give a little bit about all? And that's been a big insight for me. Like even the using of metaphor, that, oh, NVC, it's all about feelings and needs. No, there's all this way to be expansive with what creates this kind of internal experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and they do touch different parts of the right hemisphere. So I was like, okay, the NVC's changed me. How did it happen? What did it do? And then I was like, okay, feelings, amygdala, needs, right temporal junction. Is there any other language that touches the right hemisphere? Because the left hemisphere is a big old speech processor. And so I was like, okay, what kinds of language light up the right hemisphere? And you had said you had that interest in relational brain, instrumental brain, left hemisphere, right hemisphere. The way that to talk about the hemispheres that has the most integrity in terms of absolute neuroscience is to talk about the instrumental brain, which is a small cycling part of the left hemisphere run by dopamine, and the relational brain, which is a larger cycling part of the right hemisphere. But when we're looking at language, it involves more than the instrumental brain and the relational brain. But the kind of language that we use points us toward one of those. So if I'm telling you, hey, will you pick up a bottle of sparkling cider on the way to dinner? That is a instrumental request. And if I'm saying something more like, oh, I'm just really enjoying imagining our dinner tonight, that's more relational. We're in the land of relationship. And the language that we're choosing to use frames and forms our view of the world. And when we're talking about healing trauma, we want to get really specific, not just what's relational, but what stops trauma healing in its tracks and what maintains the brain's own capacity to heal itself when it's held in certain ways. What forms of language touch the right hemisphere? Feelings and needs, body sensations light up the right hemisphere. Holly Humphrey, who is the creator of the Jackal and Giraffe headbands, was the one who taught me impossible dream guesses. She says, here's a way to do stealth empathy. Stealth NVC empathy. You can make an impossible dream guess for somebody, and your guess will hold the needs energies for that person. But it has to be impossible. It cannot be possible, otherwise it's advice. And advice takes us directly into the instrumental brain.
Yeah, I was just reading in your book about that. So the impossible, I've heard other people talk about it, but I've never really gotten clear what it was. So it seems like it's a guess of a strategy, what we in NVC, what we call a strategy, but because it's like this seemingly impossible kind of dreamlike quality to it, it has the energy of a needs guess or a needs.
Yes.
Yeah?
So tell me something that you're a little annoyed about, just some kind of a little annoyance that you have.
Oh, there's some construction being done in our kitchen right now, and there's a lot of just stuff, clutter around, and it's kind of it's a little bit agitating to my nervous system.
Aw, would you love to have one of those one of those handbags that Mary Poppins had, and the things would just fly in and fly out. They wouldn't have to wander around the kitchen on their own. Whatever you called would come to you. You would not have to deal with all of the mess and the disorganization.
Yeah, well, actually, a slight, as you started to articulate that, my mind just immediately went into, I would love a big bag where all the clutter just went inside of, and then anything needed could come out, but it would just be like, yeah, this magical way that any excess clutter or things could just go away. And yeah, my brain just went, yeah. Right.
So
But
then,
it was like this impossible thing, but it was so like,
yeah.
that's so good to imagine that.
and and so, I mean, Holly Humphrey would say that we were hiding little needs energies in there, and needs for ease and support and organization. And yeah.
Is it usually
Yeah.
connected to some image, or it doesn't need to be like imaginal?
Um, well, I tend to offer people images a lot. So if it's me, it probably tends to be images, but it could be, I mean, it could be music or,
Yeah, music too lights
yeah,
up the
yeah,
brain, right? Yeah,
yeah,
music. Um,
yeah. Or I could talk about music instead of talking about a picture.
yeah, and I think related to is I've learned from the use of of like metaphor, which often is in a kind of imaginal space too, of right? Like, oh, I wonder if you're feeling like you're walking on a really hot surface, or like even though it's got this specificity to it that in NVC, pure NVC land, right? Maybe you like, oh, that's not right. But here's, I think you found like that kind of vividness of metaphor also really helps.
Lights, yeah, metaphor and simile light up the right hemisphere.
Yeah, yeah.
And facial expressions and gestures and vocal tone, a live vocal tone, lights up the right hemisphere and the nonverbal parts of the right hemisphere. There's relational decoding that's happening based on how alive somebody is emotionally.
So all these things we can use, not only how we relate to others, but even how we talk to ourselves, how we relate to
Oh,
ourselves. Yeah.
yes. 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 I mean, one of the wonderful questions we can start to ask, to come back to that idea of warmth, that warmth can have been used as manipulation and might not be trustworthy, is how much warmth is our emotional self willing to receive from us? How much is uncomfortable? How much worries? I mean, another thing with warmth is that people worry that they'll be emotionally indebted to someone else. How much do we make ourselves emotionally indebted if we're warm with ourselves? There's a lot to begin to wonder about in terms of early nervous system patterning that happens when we begin to invite ourselves to create a richer, more emotionally based relationship with ourselves.
That's frightening kind of to parts of us. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So then
can
that's sort
be.
of empathizing with the resistance to that too.
Yes, yes, saying yes, you make sense, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, do you have needs for autonomy and choice and to be respected,
Yeah.
to love, respect, and dignity?
Yeah.
Yeah. But those are such wonderful questions that we start to get to ask ourselves with this internal work. It's like, how close to you can I stand? What feels comfortable to you? Would you like touch? Would you like me to hold your hand? Is a respectful distance more comfortable? We're just genuinely interested, and that genuine interest creates a meta container of relational mattering.
Mattering, and then safety, security. I thought as you talked earlier about the work of Stephen Porges and co-regulation as social beings, how and we can co-regulate with ourselves, right? But we can also how we co-regulate in this way with each other.
And we learn to co-regulate with ourselves usually from successful co-regulation with somebody else.
Hmm. So in terms of the what I call the mediator self or the resonant self, in a way, yeah, mediating these parts of us that in some way might be in conflict, or the parts I think of too, the part or parts of ourself that are protective and reactive, and the parts of another person that are protective and reactive. And that's what's in conflict, that our resonant selves are not in conflict. That part of us that has maybe the awareness, I think of that kind of the consciousness to bring these qualities we're talking about, that soothe and calm and heal and create that safe space. That but if we have that perspective of this resonant self that can bring, in a conscious way, bring these qualities to the kind of protective parts of us and others. Yeah, that's and all the kind of the neuroscience behind why that works. Yeah, why we can do that in conflict when we're not safe, right? Conflict kind of by definition is we're not feeling safe in some way within ourselves or with others. And how do we create enough safety that we can kind of have empathy again and say, oh, you're not a danger, or if you are, I know how to manage it in a way that is skillful, right? But that can really just relax into optimal, sometimes in conflict. Let's just maybe take outer conflict for the moment, and then there's the inner that's related to the outer. But in my work in mediating between, say, people in conflict, right? I want to create a safe space, and yet I don't have direct control over their communication and their personalities and their strategies of maybe being scary to one another. And it's often a big challenge. Like, I can bring a lot of resonance myself, and yet these are two autonomous beings that I can hold space, but it's right. And I'm curious, I think you've done some work with people that way, yeah, where you mediate between people sometimes. And we're going to get to a very particular thing that you've done that I'm fascinated, we're going to dive into, we'll get to in a short bit. But yeah, anything you would say before we go there about that, about what does it mean in a way that doesn't make people overly vulnerable, like to the other? Because sometimes I've tried to create a space that's really empathic and safe, but then one of the people is behaving in a way that's very dangerous to the other and triggering a huge like trauma reaction in them. And it's I don't I'm often nervous about, or not often, sometimes, certain people, bringing them together, how dangerous that might be for one of the people. So anything you could just say on that level, just for me and for listeners, based on your experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love what Susan Sky said about, do we have, are both people willing? Is there a need that both people can tap into that brings them toward each other? Are they willing to have a mediated dialogue? Do they actually want some kind of connection, whether it's restoration of intimacy or a peaceful co-parenting relationship? That it's really hard to mediate if you have not got buy-in and both people coming towards the mediator for support. So I love the word omnipartial, that the mediator is omnipartial. You may have been the one who first used that phrase with me. I also love, do you know Stephanie West Allen? Are you familiar with Stephanie West Allen, who's a mediator? She speaks about and writes about mediation. I had the honor, the happiness of being at a speech that she did, and she was wandering through the room answering questions at tables, and I was sitting there with her, or she walked up to my table and asked her a question, and I don't even remember the question that I asked her, and she said, the mediator becomes the peace that and offers that peace to the people participating in the mediation. And she stood for a moment and she found the peace within her, and I could feel it. It rolled over me. And I was like, oh my God, there's a visceral invitation to something really different that I have not experienced before that's coming from this woman. And I think that that's another part of this interesting question about external mediation, is the mediator as a resource, the mediator as a nervous system reservoir of understanding and connection and omnipartiality.
Yeah. So that in some ways you're saying like that resonant qualities that we embody and that people can feel beyond just the verbal techniques of language, but really feel on multiple levels that safe, warm, peaceful energy flowing from us, right? And that kind of people feeling just held in that. And then there's this might be a nice segue to the I and the you. And you said something in our pre-call about how you use that in terms and maybe give a little context for it, because it's that I've not heard that before.
So as I was studying language and the hemispheres, what I discovered is that the left hemisphere is primarily the home of I, and the right hemisphere is the only hemisphere that has enough neural structure and complexity to be able to hold both a deeper sense of I and a you, and like get you as
a kind of
being, an essence. Like, what do I like? And to get there, we need to know what kind of narratives we're carrying around and pasting onto people, so that we can begin to remove them, to go more and more towards a you. But because of the way the brain works, it does something very peculiar. You can actually sort of feel it happening when you try out IU language. And there's some rules for IU language. It's like a game that you play in a way with language, because it does something specific to the brain. You use I and you in every sentence. You can't just have an I sentence, and you can't just have a you sentence. And your I actually has to be an I that exists. So in nonviolent communication, we often say, I wonder if you are feeling sad and longing for friendship. But doesn't have a true I. We don't know anything about the I. The I is wondering, but the I is not actually having an experience. So we're looking in IU language for the deepest truth that is possible to tell relationally. So rule number 1, I and you in every sentence can be I, you, I, me, mine. It can be you, your, yours. Rule number 2, no repeating yourself or the other. So you can't get into an I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. No, you can say I hate you, but then you have to say something new after that. And then the third thing is one sentence at a time. You only get to say one sentence, which can lead to some run-ons, but mostly as you get used to it, you're like, you got to deliver your relational truth, your deepest accessible relational truth, which has 2 intentions. One, for connection. You can't have a relational intention to obliterate the other person. This does not work. This does not yield juiciness. It has to be an intention for connection. And an intention to stay with your deepest truth and not go to echoing, resonating with, empathizing with the other.
I don't know if I get it yet. We might have to do it.
We can try it if you'd like.
I would like to try it. Yeah. How should we try it with a situation of yours or mine, or how should we do it?
Well, it'll be most alive if it's a situation of yours. You'll feel it most keenly if you're willing, and if it's okay.
I am. And we talked a little bit about this. I have not done another conversations with folks on the podcast. It's usually I'm guiding the other person. This would be fun to kind of be on the other end of it with you. Yeah. Should it be something external with somebody, or like something internal with myself? Does it matter?
It could be either. It doesn't matter. You just tell me who I am. I'd be either you, or I'd be either a part of you and you'd be the other part of you, or I'd be the other person, or I'd be you and you'd be the other person. you can choose whatever you want.
The one, if it was internal, there would be like, there's a part of me that sometimes kind of sabotages my success a bit and doesn't want me to get too successful. And I've been, and there's a contract there that I've been working with and all that. And for those that don't know, Sarah does unconscious contracts work that's really powerful. But what's actually feels a little more vulnerable and alive that first popped in was the relationship with my stepmother. And I have pretty challenging, long-standing, since I got married, and that one I continue to work on. It continues to, um, bear, there are things that come up continually to keep working with. So how would that one be if we worked
That's
together?
fine. Would you like me to be you, or would you like you to be you?
I think maybe we could do it both ways. I think I'd like to start with you being her and I'll be
Okay.
me. Is that,
Okay.
yeah?
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
And how do we start?
Well, you can either tell me a sentence that she said to you that's difficult, or you can start with a sentence that you would never tell her, but that's your deepest relational truth. And remember, you have an intention for connection, and you only get to say one sentence.
And it has I and you in it.
It does.
Okay. I feel hurt when you say things to me about, about how you see me.
Okay. So then when you're playing with this, you can have the other person just do what they do, or you can have them do IU language. But I'll do IU language with Sean right now so that we get to feel it more fully. I'm just trying to help you.
I question how much you actually care about me.
I often question that about myself. Now that does not get to you, so let me work on it a little longer. I can understand why you feel that way, because I often wonder whether I care about anyone.
I feel moved, touched by hearing you say that. I guess that's my sentence.
I do love you.
I want to believe that. I have felt so much pain in relation to some things you've said and done.
Yes, I have done and said those things to you.
And I also have said and done things that have been very painful for you.
That makes me cry. It's funny. I don't know if I'm getting this woman at all. But what I want to say now is, that's because you love me too.
There's no I in there, though. You got to get the I in.
That's true. Thank you for noticing that. Let me see if I can find it. I'm sad that I'm in so much pain that you even acted out.
When I acted out from that pain, I wanted you to see why I was doing what I was doing, to understand why.
It makes perfect sense to me that you have said and done things like this.
That really I feel like we got to one of the deepest relational truths just there,
Wow.
of how much I have wanted you to really see me, what the difficult choices I've made, and the difficult impacts on you, but to really be understood for the love in behind why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that, yeah, I feel like that really feels beautiful, that the way you went there with me, I feel like we got there. How was it for you to play the role?
The gift that it gave me, or the need that was met for me, was a deeper connection with the part of me that takes conflict and bad behavior for granted as a part of love. It gave me a gift of self-understanding and self-compassion.
Yeah. You mean that sometimes out of love we can do hurtful things to each other like that?
Well, in this particular incarnation, if we love, we do those things.
That's what happens. That's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was in terms of the process, just how one sentence at a time, I and you, searching for the deepest relational truth. That there's a turning point when it was, at first it was focused on the things that, you had done and how I felt impacted. And then I started to, maybe you led the way, but it started to turn from it. Oh, what can I start to own that, and that was it really shifted. Yeah, but this just one sentence at a time, and the I and the you really, I could almost like I could feel that it was bringing those both hemispheres together,
Yeah,
the
it's
I and
almost
the you, right?
visceral. Yeah, yeah,
It
it's
was.
tangible. It's like you could, yeah, it's like you feel something happening in your brain.
I did actually.
Yeah, yeah. I love the moment when you realized that I hadn't used I, and then it took so long to find an I. It was very
Yeah, but
interesting.
then you
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
And I could feel how much, yeah, I could actually feel the difference when you didn't have the I and when you had the I.
yeah, yeah,
But together, that they have to be together.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Okay, well, that was really fun and felt very deeply connecting and even healing, actually, in a way. Um, and that's just an ongoing relationship that's challenging. But this that felt really good. It felt really,
Oh,
really
good. I'm
good.
so glad. Well, I mean, a part of what happened for me with the IE language was that because I am a naturally, so to some degree, possibly a naturally empathetic person, I tend to completely erase myself
Mm.
and not to exist at all, just to do empathy. I mean, like I spent, you know, 10 years doing empathy guesses for my husband, hoping that he would come to have empathy guesses for me. I, I dragged him to NVC classes. I asked him to do empathy guesses for me. But what really changed things for us was IU language, because then I stopped disappearing.
Mm.
And when you had asked me what I would work on, what I would bring if we had had time today, I was thinking about this recent election and the way in which, when I have tenderness and a sense that the other person is harmed and coming from a place of having been harmed, then I just give up. I just don't even have an I. So I've been doing a lot of research into the links, the correlations between corporal punishment and conservative politics. That doesn't mean absolutely if you were spanked or beaten that you become conservative, but it makes it much more likely. And so there's this sense for me of living in a society which is flavored by a very invisible mistreatment of children that then impacts how we behave as adults, and the way in which I just don't even, I stop having a voice simply out of the sadness and the tenderness. I stop being willing to reveal impact on myself of the other's action.
Because you sense, or you have that, yeah, that there's maybe what's behind this person's behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
You lose, you so focused on that.
Yeah, and there's tenderness and sorrow. and hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And what IU language invites me toward in particular is a relinquishment, a relinquishing of hopelessness, and a relinquishing of responsibility for the other.
Because you're in there too. Like you're equally in that sentence, each sentence by sentence, you're equally there. And and you can still have tons of empathy for the other, but that you get to be fully there too.
Yeah. So what I had imagined was a internal dialogue between you and I would do between the part of me that just collapses into tenderness and hopelessness, and the part of me that's like, hey, let's share impact and make connection. So,
well, can we do we have time to do a short internal mediation there?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to do that. So yeah, you kind of set it up for us already, these two parts of you, and we can kind of mediate empathy with each one and between each one, kind of both of our resonant selves can bring that to bear on it. So which part of you wants to go first, just receiving a little bit of empathy from us?
Oh, I'll just start with the one that sinks down and it's like, it's useless.
Okay. Yeah. So for that part of you is saying it's useless.
They're too damaged. It's useless.
They're too damaged. And it's just, there's no point. It's hopeless.
Yeah. Waste of my time.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because nothing, what can change? It's too deep. It's it's so overwhelming. The suffering that some of us go through. Many of us.
And I don't want to use my life energy.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to put your life energy where it's going to make the most kind of contribution.
And not just contribution, but relational connection.
Relational connect. Oh, where there's actually going to be relational connection. Put your life energy there. And this part of Sarah can say, with certain people, it's just hopeless. And I'm just going to give them empathy, but there's no space for
I'm not even going to give them empathy.
uh,
Just going to see if I can not have any contact.
Yeah. Yeah. So this, because of maybe, the amount of suffering and pain and trauma and the defenses there with some people, this part of you is like, I want to.
It's not because of their suffering. I mean, there's the tenderness for them, but actually it's more boredom. I want engagement.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a kind of connecting and engaging and being met, and yeah. And that's where you want to put your energy. Yeah. And so how does this, when this part of Sarah is talking, what are the physical sensations, the emotions, what's happening for you as you speak from this part of you?
There's sort of there's an interesting movement from hopelessness to boredom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I end up with less tenderness and more impatience.
Right. Yeah. I could, feel that shift that kind of happened there, right? At first it was a kind of collapsing feeling almost, right? A kind of giving up, and then it turned into irritation, ultimately frustration. Boredom.
Refusal.
Yeah. So anything else about what you experience on this side? Okay.
No.
So can we, is it, this part of you feels complete? Yeah.
Okay.
Feels heard. Right? Okay. And then do we have permission to check in with the other side of this internal conversation? Yeah. Okay. So what does that one have to say, just to be heard about?
This one is like, let's see, the voice would be, I want to not give up on anybody. And I also want something that Sarah also doesn't do. I want to reveal impact.
Let me just say that back. You don't want to give up on anybody. And you want to reveal impact. You want to be seen, like for impact on you. Did I get that right?
Of the actions, yeah.
Of the
Yeah.
actions.
Yeah.
You want to be
Yeah.
able to voice that, to be seen, heard for that. And you don't want to give up on people.
Don't want to. The other one starts coming in and going, oh, do not waste my life energy. Please do not go there.
A little emergency empathy for that side. That you really want some reassurance that there's choice about this. Is that right? That we're
And
not deciding anything. We're not
that we're not going
going
to
to any
waste
strategy.
Sarah's life energy. Right.
You want to protect Sarah's
Because
life
it
energy.
ends up being, they end up needing empathy and they can't hear impact anyway. So it just goes back to that hopelessness. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, you just really want to be a choice about where you put your life energy that's most fulfilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's like a noticing of us slipping into that pattern of just doing empathy to try to understand, to try to create. So this is from a real life situation. Right after the election, I received an email from somebody who was very upset that I had used the words mothering person in an email instead of using the word mother in an email, and that I was being woke by using the words mothering person.
So can we go back to the second part of Sarah? Is that okay? Yeah. And is there maybe so you said that you don't want to give up on people, so you want to have faith in people? Is that what's a good way to put that in the
I want to find them. But I don't want to find them by just being an empathy rag.
Okay. So you want to find them and you want to be found. You want to be.
That brings tears to my eyes. It goes right back into the hopelessness. That's not even possible. And then there's the alarmed aloneness and the sorrow. My lips are trembling.
And that's the first voice. Is that coming from there?
I'm not sure they're two different voices, interestingly enough. They're sort of the same voice. But the voice itself wavers. Yeah, wavers back and forth.
Okay.
Between wanting real dialogue and wanting not to waste time.
Yeah. And to not waste time is about your life energy.
Yeah.
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 So then there's the aspect of you that wants to put your life energy where it's to be most fulfilling, and the part of you and the side of this voice that wants to find people.
Yeah. And wants to find anybody.
Yeah, that anybody is findable. Like anybody's findable like that.
Yeah, but I do realize. So I wrote back to that person and I was like, do I understand you, And I sort of did a paraphrase, and the person wrote back and they said, like this almost incomprehensible paragraph about, and I wasn't sure what they meant, because it was like some kind of download, some kind of anti-woke download of exclusion and DEI and how people who are not woke will be left out. So I wrote back again and I said, do I understand that you really care about people and you want to make sure everybody's included? But even then I was like, but what about the people that I said I was including by saying mothering person, like a like a man whose wife dies in childbirth and he has to take care of his baby. He becomes the mother. He's not the mother. He's the mothering person. What about leaving those people out? I was like already in an argument inside of myself, and the person didn't respond.
Mm.
And I was very split about even responding at all. So it's just, it's very interesting to do this with you.
Mm. So in remembering that part of, or that exchange, or the rest of the exchange, there's this the attempt to find the person, to find their what was underneath the story. Yeah, and that kind of weren't able to, in a way, at least get confirmation.
Right. I think I could write, based on the things that we've been doing, I think I could write to people. Are you actually interested in a dialogue, and are you willing to commit to 5 or 6 exchanges? Because I think it would take this much for us to find connection. I think I'll try that next time and see what happens.
So is it that in a way that's a solution that emerged in you, giving some attention to both aspects of this, that if there is some sense of a commitment to dialogue, to trying to, and if there isn't, then the part of you that says, it's, I don't want to put my energy there. But if there's a little bit of at least saying, yeah, I want that. I want to connect. I want to find each other in that sense, right? If anything that gives an indication, then it, like, okay, I'd be willing to put some energy here.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it helps with other situations too, with conflicts in the NVC community, to imagine doing that, to say, I'm interested in dialogue, but I'm only want to go in if you're willing to commit to a certain
If you're
number of
there,
sessions.
if you also want to meet me, to find me, I'll engage the part of me that really wants to meet you no matter what. But otherwise, I'm going to kind of protect my energy and my
I like this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you check in with this, both aspects of you, are they both happy with this? Feeling good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they like this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I like it too. And it's yeah, I could really resonate to that kind of certain kinds of conversations when it seems like empathy doesn't really go anywhere, or doesn't create what I want with my energy. But again, I think when we do this deep inner work, right, we can, it's universal. These two parts of you, I can feel them both in me, that doesn't want to do things that feel really unproductive just because I value something. But it's like actually not, serving, and wanting to be honest about that, and really like kind of, really honest. And then the part of me that really loves to connect with people no matter what. And I love when you said doesn't want to give up, because that I don't, and yet you can just, oh, right. I really I got a lot of empathy for that first voice. And something we didn't actually focus on in this conversation, but you mentioned, and I just want to underscore it, that we're talking just a few days after the results of the presidential election, and well, not just presidential, but the 2024 U.S. election, and Donald Trump got elected, and then it looks like the Senate, and maybe even the House of Representatives, that all might be more Republican. So it's a very huge time of a kind of very consequential happening. And so that's a bit the backdrop, really, of what you were just, for those that didn't quite catch that, maybe, but that's the time frame that we're in right now, and just how much is going on in the country around of trauma getting activated, and these kind of, how do we engage in these kind of conversations with one another across political divide, which I'm very fascinated by. How do we kind of, get through these impasses where there's certain narratives and stories that really seem to just cut us off from each other, and how do we find one another when there's like these kind of barriers to that, right? So I'm glad we touched on this internally.
Oh, it's very nourishing to get to do it both ways, to get to do the IU language for you and for you to get to do this mediation for me. I'm really grateful.
It's the first time I've done it both ways, and you were the perfect person to do it with. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we end, or closing kind of anything? But did we not address anything you wanted to address today?
I just want to say for everybody who's a listener that really nonviolent communication is the most brain-changing technology, the brain healing, transforming, straightening out, getting the human race back on track that I know of. And I'm just grateful for everybody that's listening. And I'm very grateful to you, John, for all the things that you've done for me without even knowing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's truly a delight to hear about it. Knowing that and all that you are contributing to the world through NVC, but all the context you put around it with neuroscience and trauma and the trauma work, the healing work. I think you're one of the main people in NVC that's really making it accessible to so many people that wouldn't otherwise, and much more powerful because of how you're kind of extending it through what you've learned, and still staying true to it, but also really, I think, extending the power of it. So thank you, Sarah.
It's lovely to receive those words.
Yeah. Well, lovely to be with you. I'll follow up with you after. How would you like people to kind of find you in the sense of your work and what you're most up to at this time and what you would want people to know about? Yeah.
If you go to my website, sarahpeyton.com, there's a Start Healing Now button that takes you get through a series of guided meditations and an introduction, through a series of emails to the basics of relational neuroscience and resonant language. And then you can either go into the work by starting at the beginning with skill building, or you can start with some subject that interests you. The website has the classes that are currently running. The next big thing that's starting is a year-long program looking at the influence of our mothers on our brains and how to move from Mother 1.0 to Mother 2.0.
Get to have a new mother, huh?
You get to have a new mother. Wow. Yeah. And then, as you mentioned, in the spring, for folks who love the neuroscience, we have the Resonant Summit where we bring neuroscientists to talk about different aspects of relational connection.
Yeah, I did that last year. I thought it was wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again, Sarah. Yeah, so needed at this time. I mean, this understanding not only of NVC and conflict, but also these other things we talked about today. That, the kind of world we're heading into politically and socially, environmentally, ecologically, like so many things that we humans need to heal on these larger levels, so we can work together, so we can address the enormous challenges, and especially politically now that things may get pretty rough. And so I'm glad people have the resource of you and your work to help navigate these massive challenges that we're heading towards. Yeah. So thank you again, Sarah. And
thank you, John.
I will be in touch to follow up with you. Just closing here. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to subscribe to the Mediate Your Life podcast and follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram at John Kenyon. You can also download the Mediate Your Life app to practice these principles in your own life. With love, empathy, and care, I'm John Kenyon. Thank you for listening.